Right.
Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our live stream as an introduction to EVs. This is going to be a session open for anybody who's got an interest in moving to an electric vehicle, or perhaps you're someone who has only just got yourself into electric transport, or just for learning things if you've been an old hand EV driver for years and perhaps just want to learn something new. So I'm Neil Lee Roberts, and the other people, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Nigel Baker. I'm one of the admins for the Sussex EVs group, and I'll be running through a presentation today along with the other guys.
Hi, I'm Warren Phillips. I'm also another admin on Sussex EVs. Been an EV driver for a few years now, kind of been through all this stuff and spend a lot of my time helping users and new people get into electric cars.
Okay, well, let's get started. So, sort of start off with maybe a description of what we really mean by electric car, because it covers a number of things. So there'll be a bunch of acronyms as we go through, but I'll try and explain those. So the simplest definition of electric car is one that uses electricity to drive the wheels, and that's the same for a pure electric car, so a battery electric vehicle that you see in the top left. Hybrid electric vehicles which recover the energy from braking to power electric motors. There are plug-in hybrids, so the bottom left, where it's similar to the hybrid. They've got an engine and they've also got electric motors, but also you can plug them in to charge the battery. And then the last one is in the top right, the extended range electric vehicles. So those, they have a battery, but they also have like a generator on board, so the motor, the combustion motor, doesn't power the wheels, it just charges the battery. One thing you may have heard in the press is the term self-charging hybrid. Really what that's saying is that it charges the battery by braking, and you can't plug it in. So it's effectively petrol is the only form of power for it. And the last thing maybe to talk about here is hydrogen cars. It's interesting that they're essentially the same kind of technology as the extended range electric vehicle. They have a tank with hydrogen in it, and it uses what's called a fuel cell to convert that into electricity to power the vehicle.
So I suppose examples of extended range electric vehicles at the moment would be obviously the i3 as in the image, but also the Vauxhall Ampera. Are there any others that we can think of? I personally can't think of any others.
Yeah, I think it's something that's falling out of favour a bit as pure battery electric vehicles and become more effective with longer range and the prices coming down. I think they're probably moving away from the extended range vehicles. It's the plug-in hybrid has probably taken over that kind of space to a certain degree. Okay.
There's a comment there saying Outlander, but actually an Outlander isn't an extended range. An Outlander is just a PHEV.
Plug-in hybrid, yeah.
Yeah.
So if we look at the components of so I've got a diagram here of a plug-in electric, a hybrid electric, because that contains pretty much all of the components you would see in any electric car. So it has an engine in it which will drive the wheels, has fuel tank, but also has a battery pack and a place to plug in the electricity to charge up. So all of these components, all of the the normal radiator, motor, changing the oil, all of those things are exactly the same as with a combustion car, but it's also got electric battery pack and an electric motor which will drive the wheels. If you think about a pure electric vehicle, one that just has batteries and you charge it either at home or at a charging station on the road, it's the same, but it doesn't have the fuel tank, the engine, the radiator or cooling for the engine, and the fuel filler. So it's a simpler infrastructure. For the extended range vehicles, the fuel cell vehicles, it's similar. They tend to probably have a larger battery than the hybrid cars, and the generator takes the place of the engine, but it's a similar kind of concept. And if we look at what a pure electric vehicle looks like, it's typically they're starting to look more like this. So they'll have a large battery, often in the floor of the car, and electronics to convert that to power the motors. Some cars will have the same format. So some manufacturers have cars which can be regular petrol, hybrid, or battery electric, and then the electrics for the pure battery form, they fit into the space that the motor and the other components on a standard car would be. Whereas with a pure electric vehicle, they tend to arrange it. They tend to call it something like a skateboard. So it's like a very flat platform that runs underneath the car. And the car is fitted on top of that, and that actually means that the car has a very low center of gravity, which helps offset the weight of the car with driving.
It also means, actually, because of the shape of the skateboard design, you can get far more internal capacity within the cabin. So, for instance, a VW ID3 has about the same internal capacity as a diesel Passat.
Mm-hmm. And that's it's an ID3, the picture here. So there's quite a lot of space in there in a battery electric vehicle, and it actually enables the designers to move things around and make it slightly easier. And another thing with electric cars is the driving dynamics is slightly different. So they typically don't have gears, and the car will accelerate very quickly. Electric motors produce the fastest acceleration from a standstill, so they're very quick from a standing start. With larger motors, they can act both as a motor but also as a generator. So this thing they call regenerative braking, and when you're slowing down, it turns it into reverse, and it actually start to recharge the battery by slowing down, which also means you don't use the brakes as often. And with some of the latest cars, you can almost drive the car with one pedal almost all of the time. So lift off the accelerator, it will slow down to a stop, press the accelerator, it will go. You'd only actually need to use the brake pedal if you have to stop very quickly. One thing that's probably important to talk about is the relative efficiency of battery electric cars. So there's a number of reasons you might want to consider electric cars. There's the climate emergency, there's the cost to run, and a number of different factors. But electric motors are very, very efficient. So even if you take the electricity generated in either a power plant or with renewables like wind or solar, and then transmitting that into the car across the grid to your car, charging the battery, and then using that battery to power the motor, then you tend to get something like 73% efficiency on running the car. With hydrogen fuel cell cars, it takes so much energy to split the hydrogen out of water, and the reconversion is not particularly efficient. So the the actual efficiency of the use of the electricity is significantly lower. And just as a last comparison with like petrol and diesel, so much of the energy is lost by heat and noise. The energy, there's a lot of energy in petrol and diesel, but it's relatively inefficient to convert that into motion.
It's quite an interesting metric, isn't it? That hydrogen on its own, just purely from an energy perspective, the physics is it will always be about a quarter as efficient as running your vehicle just purely on electric. The place where hydrogen really works is probably very large vehicles like ships, like trucks. But yeah, for small scale vehicles, the efficiency just isn't going to be there.
Unless they come out with a different technology. I find it hard to think of how they will, but it's possible that there may be another technology which makes hydrogen more efficient. And obviously there's an incentive to develop all kind of green energy solutions. So you would expect electric motors to become more efficient, hydrogen fuel cells to be more efficient. I think we're probably getting close to the end of the efficiency gains for petrol cars.
The most efficient petrol cars around are the Formula One cars. I'm a big Formula One fan, and they're about 40% efficient compared to your regular car at the engine. And a lot of the energy is because of things like the electrical systems around it and the regeneration systems around which we have in our electric cars already.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that may be of a particular advantage for hydrogen, and particularly for heavy transport, is where we have large amounts of renewable energy that can't be used, or there's an excess generated, then we can divert that to produce hydrogen for effectively a very low cost. And that's, I think, something that will be happening more and more. But for personal transportation, there are a number of issues with hydrogen. One thing I did, I couldn't find a slide that someone had already done of this by comparing the different types, actually how much they cost to run. And confusingly, things are done with different units. For electricity, the electricity unit that tends to be used is kilowatt hours, and that's what you get on your meter reading. A good way of imagining a kilowatt hour is if you have a 1 bar, 1 kilowatt electric fire, run that for an hour, that's 1 kilowatt hour. Petrol's obviously now sold in litres, and hydrogen sold in kilograms, just to make it more confusing. So if you were to use, say, I picked a Tesla Model 3 because that's the stats were quite easily available for that, and it's a medium sort of family-sized car. If you're on the standard electricity tariff, the average tariff in the UK is about 16.5 pence per kilowatt. You get roughly 3 miles to every kilowatt of electricity you put into the car, which gives you a cost per mile to travel of about 5 pence. For a BMW 3 Series, similar kind of size car, similar weight and type, it's over twice as much if you use petrol. I did put a comparison later down to the Citroen C1, which is probably about the most efficient you're likely to get, and that's still maybe 10 pence per mile to run. I've put a section in the middle in green for the Tesla Model 3, where one benefit you have with an electric car is charging at home, and where you have the ability to do that. And you can also go on to effectively EV friendly tariffs. So there are a number which give you maybe 4 or 5 hours a night down to 5 pence per kilowatt. And if you set your car to charge overnight when it's cheap and there's not so much strain on the grid, you can get your cost per mile down very significantly. So mine would charge maybe effectively 2 pence a mile, and that's a fifth of the price to run the most efficient petrol car you can have.
Yeah, that is interesting. So I'm on Octopus Go as well, which gives you 4 hours at 5p per kilowatt hour overnight. And I run a Hyundai Ioniq, which is anywhere between 4.5 miles per kilowatt hour to 5.5 miles per kilowatt hour. So when you use a car as efficient as something like the Hyundai, you're talking not much more than 1 penny per mile, which is miraculous, really. And it's the same for Warren's Nero.
Yeah, I run an e-Nero, but also there's a comment in here about Agile where you get paid for charging your car. I've got solar panels, as does Neil. So in the summer, I can charge my car off my solar panels. So it costs nothing. In fact, I'm on the FIT tariff, so I'm getting paid to generate energy anyway. So I get paid for 15p per kilowatt to charge my car when I'm charging it.
Right. Then the last item on the slide is the Toyota Mirai. So that's one of the 2 hydrogen fuel cell cars that's available in the UK. A kilogram of hydrogen costs roughly £10, and you'll get about close to 60 miles on that. So running a hydrogen car, you've got a cost per mile of about 18 pence, and it's it's a quite an expensive way of doing that. As Neil said, he gets probably a better range on his Ioniq, more miles per kilowatt. I think a number of other people will get similar improved miles per unit. It really depends on how you drive, and the numbers here were taken from an average, and these were from motoring journalists who took cars on long runs to try and get exactly how many they used. One thing we'll find often with EV users is because you can see how much energy you're using as you're driving, you may tend to drive more gently or more efficiently. There are people who get maybe 4 or 5 miles per kilowatt with their cars if they drive quite carefully, which makes things even more in the balance. One thing that was in the press recently is that a comparison with petrol and battery cars, because the assertion, which is true, is that battery cars is quite a lot of energy goes into the manufacture of the batteries, and there's actually more carbon dioxide emitted in the production of a battery car than a comparable petrol car. So here, to produce a large family-sized car, you're actually producing 20 tons of carbon dioxide, and for a battery equivalent, it's probably closer to 27 tons. But there was a report that was picked up by almost all of the major newspapers, the Times, the Independent, Financial Times, where it was suggested that it would take 50,000 miles for a battery electric car to overcome that initial aspect. And this was something that was published by by a consultancy company run by the marketing manager of Aston Martin, who probably had a bit of a different viewpoint on this. And they like cherry picked some of the values, that some of the information which wasn't quite true. So they had taken the best case for a petrol car, the Volvo XC40 they'd looked at, and the worst case for the electric equivalent. Whereas that's really not quite that's not quite fair. The actual real world use of the Volvo would generate more emissions, and the actual mix across the EU and UK, the electric mix is actually not actually generating as much carbon dioxide as they would anticipated. So if you're just doing this purely on a CO2 emissions basis, the break-even point is probably closer to 25,000 kilometers, or about 15,000 miles. So a year and a half of driving, then your car is probably more efficient than an equivalent petrol car would have been. Now, we've then got to consider whether we should be buying new cars, and the impact on the climate, but it's just important to actually realise some of the comparisons. One of the other things that's important is the charging of your car. There are a number of different ways to charge the car. In different cars have different charging connectors, which is probably quite confusing for a new owner. And also you have chargers given different names, so slow, fast, rapid are the names that are used. And just to give a bit of background behind that, so if a charger is a slow charger, it's charging at less than 7 kilowatts. So it will take an hour to give you 7 kilowatt hours of charging to your car. Fast is between 7 and 43 kilowatts, and rapid is over that. If you have a home charger installed as part of your car setup when you have an electric car, you'll be typically getting something like 7 kilowatts. So your slowish home charger would be classed as fast. And it's just a name that's used, which I think is probably slightly confusing. But rapid chargers are the ones you would typically use on a long journey, and they're the motorway style service centre chargers. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this.
I think technically rapid is 43 to 150, and then 150 and above is ultra rapid.
Yeah. Okay.
It's also sometimes quite helpful to consider the kilowatt rate in terms of how many miles you can put in a certain amount of time. So 7 kilowatt is going to be somewhere in the region of 22 miles in an hour.
Yeah.
A 50 kilowatts going to be somewhere in the range of 130 miles in an hour, something like that. I haven't got the figures directly in front of me, but that is in some ways an easier way of understanding the different speeds. So on a 3-pin socket, if you're talking about, I think a 3-pin socket at 10 amps is about 2.4 kilowatts.
Yeah.
So for every hour, that's going to be somewhere in the region of 7 to 8 miles.
Yeah. Okay. So the number of different connectors you have, so as on the left, the 3-pin connector, most cars will be sold with an adapter which enable you to plug into any 3-pin socket. You have the advantage there that you can plug in almost anywhere if you need to. So if you're visiting family and they don't have dedicated EV chargers, which most of them won't at the moment, you can still plug in and charge and get quite an appreciable amount of charge overnight. The Type 1 connectors, and correct me if you disagree with this, they tend to be being phased out. I think some of the earlier cars in the UK used a Type 1 connector, but now I think Type 2 is almost the standard.
Type 2 is pretty much ubiquitous. The Type 1 came on the Gen 1 Leaf, so Leafs before 2018. Do you know of any other cars which came with Type 1? Did the Gen 1? Oh, the Outlander came with a Type 1. Okay.
I think so, yeah. So in America, they still use Type 1, and they use and their CCS is Type 1 CCS.
Okay. But in the UK and most of Europe, certainly for the Rapids, these are the 3 types of connectors you would typically see. CHAdeMO is kind of almost like a fire hose size adapter that you plug into your car. Tesla managed to modify the Type 2 to work differently and provide DC. I think slightly confusingly, it uses the same type of plug but doesn't quite fit in the same way. And the CCS connector is effectively, it's a Type 2 connector with a couple of pins underneath for the direct DC current to be put into the car. I think I get the feeling that CCS is becoming, again, a bit like Type 2, is becoming the standard of use, because it works with the same Type 2 socket with the extra pins. I think almost all of the rapid chargers that are being installed will have JADMO connectors as well. But my feeling is that CCS is probably going to be the dominant standard going forwards.
Yeah, there's a comment
Certainly
from
in
Gary
Europe.
saying that the Kia Soul before 2018 was a Type 1.
Okay.
Just to get that in there. Yeah, the people who have the older Leaf could take up to 43 on the Type 2 charger, which is reasonably quick. But we're not seeing those on chargers anymore. So you're only seeing LMO and CCS these days.
Mhm.
Sorry, Warren, did you said the original Leaf? Did you mean the Zoe?
No, sorry, the original Soul.
Oh, Soul. Sorry. Right.
Okay. One thing to note. So I got this slide from EV Bits, and I had to amend it because the charging rates for the DC connectors keep on going up and up. So for CCS, we now have some chargers in the UK which are providing 350 kilowatts of power, and up to 350 kilowatts, which is quite an incredible amount of power. If you go back to my comment about a 1 bar electric fire consuming 1 kilowatt, it's effectively you've got like 350 bar electric fires worth of power going into your car, and that's quite amazing technology, I think.
I think the only car which can come close to that at the moment is the Porsche Taycan, which I believe is somewhere in the region of 280 kilowatts peak, something like that.
And the new Audi GT.
Oh,
Yeah.
and the new Audi GT. But also,
It's the same
actually,
car.
yeah, okay. The Ioniq 5 is going to have an 800-volt battery pack. So theoretically, that's going to be able to get close to those kind of rates. And I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to be seeing more and more vehicles coming out with an 800-volt pack design, which will be able to make use of these much higher speeds.
Yeah. But it's not a flat rate of charging. So it's I'll come on to that maybe slightly later in the slides. It charges at different rates depending on how empty or full the battery is. So anyway, so moving on. So if the question is, for the viewers, would an electric car be right for you? I suppose if ever asked this, the short answer is yes, but there are a few buts. There are a number of types of car that you can't get in a pure electric form unless you get one converted specially for you. So there are no really dedicated off-road vehicles like a Land Rover. There's no camper vans. There's no convertibles currently. Tesla made one before, which was unbelievably expensive, but they aren't made anymore. There's no true, what I would call, luxury cars, although Mercedes and BMW and Jaguar make cars. They're SUVs. They're not quite the S-Class, the 7 Series, the big executive Jaguar type cars. They're stepping stones to that. All the manufacturers say they will produce those, but they're not quite there yet. And also, when they do arrive, they're going to be very expensive. So if you wanted to get a second-hand Jaguar XJ, you could buy a petrol one with a lot of miles on it for very little money. They just don't exist in the electric car world at the moment, and they're likely to be expensive. And also for electric cars, the second-hand cars are still expensive. I think if you look on Auto Trader, about the cheapest one you're likely to get would be about £4,500. And it's because there's a supply and demand issue. There more people want electric cars than have them available, so that's keeping the price up. And also the components of electric cars, so the battery and the motors can be reused in other things, whereas with a kind of an end-of-life petrol car, it's effectively junk. So that's a problem, and it's something I think the government needs to work on, trying to work out how we can get electric cars to some of the market segments who possibly couldn't afford them at the moment. But it's only going to be an option to look at second-hand cars over the next few years. The prices will drop slowly, I believe.
I just want to pick up on the luxury car section there, because there's been quite a few comments coming in. So the Audi e-tron, which you did mention briefly, is actually quite a luxurious car. So although it's not,
but it's not an S-Class. It's kind of it's
not a sedan.
Yeah.
It's a Grand Touring, not a sedan.
Yeah. And I think we will be seeing those over the next few years. There certainly will be some coming out. I believe I heard that Rolls-Royce have something in the works.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly that sector, there are companies that are definitely looking into it. Regarding convertibles, I don't know if this was just someone's dream, but there was a photo of an ID3 convertible. Whether it's actually going to come to market or whether it is just something that someone knocked up, I'm not entirely sure. Campers, yes, there is a definite lack of campers in the market at the moment, and there are a lot of people who've got existing electric vans and converted them, like EMV 200s and things of that nature. But there's no dedicated camper as yet, and as you say, off-road, there are some four-wheel drive electric cars. The I-Pace is an example, but you would never really realistically consider an I-Pace to be an off-roader. And
the other thing on the true luxury side, and I've not included here things like the Porsche Taycan. That's like a high-end sports car rather than a luxury sedan. So there are sports cars available. There are certain things that aren't available, but they all will be over time. And you mentioning Rolls-Royce is interesting. Probably a little over a year ago, before the lockdown, I was having a drink in a pub beer garden near Goodwood, and a bunch of Rolls-Royce engineers had come over. Some of them from Germany, some of them from the UK. They were talking about what was happening in the market, and I went over and bothered them and asked them what they were planning to do with electrification. And there was a very interesting split between them. Two of them were, yes, absolutely, this is the future, we have to do this. And those on the engine side who spent their lifetimes producing the quietest, most comfortable engines possible felt that was being taken away from them. But I think they all accepted it was probably the future. It's not necessarily a future that some of the Rolls-Royce wanted. If you're buying a car, so this isn't an electric car specific slide. This is what people say that's most important for them when they're looking for a new car. And very little of this actually relates directly to EVs. But fuel efficiency is one of the most important things. And as we've seen earlier, I probably downplayed the efficiency of electric cars. They're actually maybe significantly more efficient than I'd put on my charts. But that's a very important thing. Because of the layout of electric cars, typically they are very safe. They have a very strong structural component in the floor of the car for those with the skateboard design. So that's important. Obviously, the environmental friendliness is higher, but it's important to think about what things are most important. And obviously, price is going to be a high criterion as well. So if we look at actually running an electric car, servicing tends to be cheaper. There are fewer moving parts, and they tend to be on quite long service intervals. So it does mean it's very difficult to, you wouldn't normally want to service one yourself. For mine, the only service I can do is to fill up the windscreen washer bottle and plug it into the electricity. So I think the other things there are, obviously the manufacturer garages will do that, and there's also a network of garages for the Hevra scheme. They train in electric car maintenance, and that's that's picking up, and we were in a slightly chicken and egg situation. There's probably a couple of 100,000 electric cars pure electric cars on the road, and as opposed to tens of millions of normal petrol cars. But it will come with the development of the market. Insurance is insurance. If you buy buy insurance, you should try and get the best deal and the best thing for you. But there are some insurance policies that have some EV specifics. So some of them have breakdown cover. If you run out of electricity, they will tow you to the nearest charger, or they will cover your charge point outside your leads, things like that. So it's important to, if you're looking for insurance for electric car, just to consider those factors. The MOT is the same. You should be able to take it to any garage and get the MOT done. Some garages don't like it. For some reason, they just say, I can't do electric cars. And that's either because they're not properly trained, or they have some kind of denial about wanting to do it. But most garages should be able to do an MOT, and it's essentially the same. And one last point on the servicing is on tyres. It's not at all related to EVs, but please don't skimp on tyres. They're the bits that connect your car to the road, and it's the most important thing to spend money on if you're considering any upgrades, or if you're renewing it. It helps with obviously braking, steering, acceleration, all of those factors.
Can also find actually that the tyres you choose can have a significant impact on the efficiency of the vehicle. Mm-hmm. So if you have a tyre with a low rolling resistance, you will find a noticeable difference in your efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Not to mention just simple things like keeping your tyres inflated properly.
Yeah.
It's something like most tyres aren't inflated properly, and it's something like 3 or 4% on your efficiency, which in an electric car, efficiency is everything. So,
another factor obviously is some of the EVs are heavier, so you need to make sure your tyres are rated to the correct weight. But with I think the rolling resistance comment, you've always got this trade-off between having them being very efficient in not slowing the car down and providing the important the extra grip. So there's always a trade-off. Onto range. How much range do you actually need? There's been recently very much a campaign for the manufacturers to have ever-increasing range in the cars, which means effectively having larger and larger batteries, which I'm not sure is strictly necessary. So some of the latest cars will have a range of 400 miles between charging if you go from full to empty. And I don't think most people drive like that. They did a survey on what people thought they needed, and the typical was somewhere between 100, 150, maybe 200 miles, and a lot of EVs will provide this. But that's what people thought they wanted. If you actually have a look at how many miles people drive in a day, very few people, unless they're going on a long journey, will drive more than 40 miles in a day. So it's not actually that necessary to have a huge range, but it does require you to think about how you use your car, certainly if you're going on a long journey.
Yeah, I have a comment about this actually. On this YouTube channel, on the Sussex EVs YouTube channel, we have a video of when we drove a Gen 1 Leaf 24 kilowatt hour from Sussex up to West Yorkshire, and that was 230 miles. We had to stop 4 times. Each stop was only about 20 minutes. The big takeaway for us is when we reached our destination, we arrived feeling fresh and not stressed, because the entire journey was stress-free. We would just do a 60-mile jump, charge for 20 minutes, then do another 60 miles, charge for 20 minutes. And it's a different way of thinking. With our current car, the Ioniq, it is capable of between 170 and 190 miles. Realistically, I think my bladder range is probably about 130 miles. So that's what we would target. That means that we could get up to West Yorkshire with arguably only one stop. It is just a different way of thinking. With more than 50%, well, as this slide says, about 65% of all drivers in the UK have a commute of less than 30 miles per day. I'll use the example of the Ioniq, 170 miles. You could last an entire week without charging it. So do you need 300 to 400 miles? Arguably not. What you need is a car which is efficient. And there are plenty of efficient electric cars out there.
What you need is a reliable charging. If you know you can charge your car, without any hassle when you need to charge it, the range doesn't matter. Even if it's short distance, long distance, none of it matters. If you know you can get a charge when you need it, if you can get a charge on the street, if you haven't got an off-street parking, you can charge on the street outside your house on a lamppost overnight without a worry. Then you can charge your car a couple of times a week and not think about it. If you can get a charge anywhere on your journey, if you have to do a 100-mile or 200-mile or a 500-mile journey, if you've just got reliable charging, it doesn't really matter how, because you don't stress then. You know that even if it takes a long time, you can still get somewhere. You're not worried about chargers being broken. Reliable charging is the kind of key to where we need to be, and that's what's going on now. Where there's lots of stuff going on about improving charging networks, improving the experience customers have. EVA England, who I'm part of, are actually doing a survey on this now as part of to feed into the government survey on charging at the moment. So,
and it's very arguable that what we need is chargers at places where cars are parked overnight or during the day. If a car is going to be parked at a place for a significant amount of time, let's just say an office building with a car park, if you have even just 3 pin sockets in that car park, that will cover more than 65% of people's needs for the day, because in 8 hours you'll be able to charge somewhere in the region of 60, 70 miles on a 3 pin.
I did a trip up to Littleborough a year and a half ago when we got the Nero, the e-Nero. And it was with my daughter. We were going to see friends, going to see my goddaughter, and we had plenty of time. We just had all the time in the world. So I drove up to the NEC, plugged it into one of their free charging points there, and we went to watch a film and have lunch and potted around the shops, came back full charge and carried on. So my total charge time was literally like a minute to find the charger and plug it in, because it was just part of my day. I didn't do anything different. And we plan a lot of our trips that way. So if we plan something, we try and plan it so there's charging where we go. So we go somewhere, we plug it in on a destination charger, and we'll spend time there. And then we don't actually charge in that sense. You just have part of your day. So we're looking forward to doing Chester Zoo. Chester Zoo's put in a whole bunch of destination chargers, and it'll be exactly that. We'll drive up there, we'll plug in, we'll spend a day at the zoo, and then we'll come out and drive off in our fully charged car. We did that Eden project where we just literally drove up, plugged the car in, had a day at the Eden project, left fully charged and carried on going. And that's kind of where things need to be, and that's where things are going to be, I hope.
Yeah, arguably the question, how long does it take to charge, is the wrong question, because it takes 20 seconds to plug it in, and then in the morning it's full. Or you plug it in when you reach your destination, it takes 20 seconds to plug it in, you go do your day, whatever it is your day is full of, and then you get back and it's charged. It's done it. You weren't standing by the car waiting for it to charge that whole time. The paradigm is different.
Yeah, and also kind of planning around things. So if you are going on a long journey and you need to stop for 20 minutes to get a top up on your electricity, then the thought is you go out, you stretch your legs, use the toilet, maybe get a coffee. Whereas in a petrol car, you might just drive into the service station, fill up with petrol, and go again. I find it more relaxing doing it with the stopping for a little while every few hundred miles, and also it's quite it's just a different way of doing things. I think that works well for me. Right, moving on. I was trying to find some slides on cost of ownership, and this is looking at some information. This is done by Direct Line with Auto Trader, looking at the costs of running an electric car versus a petrol car. I think they compared a number of similar models. So for the ones that the group they considered, it's probably on average maybe £5,000 more to buy the electric car, even with some of the government grants that are available. But over the 1 year, so the next 3 lines are the annual costs. So you're saving £500 a year on petrol, maybe a couple of £100 on tax and maintenance, and the insurance varies. I haven't found any significant difference in my insurance costs to a comparable petrol car, but over a year you're saving a certain amount of money, and over say 10 years it's actually would have been cheaper to have run the electric car than a petrol car. So that's one consideration. And the last one is depreciation. People were concerned about maybe the depreciation of electric cars as the technology is changing, but it seems at the moment that a 1-year-old EV has only lost maybe 12% of its value, whereas a combustion engine car has lost twice as much of its original purchase value. And my feeling is that will continue as we move closer to the phase out of petrol vehicles from 2030 and beyond. I suspect that electric vehicles will start to hold their value even more against petrol cars. One other point here is that at the moment for company cars, electric cars have a 0% benefit in kind this year. I think it moves up to 1% or 2% over the next few years, but it's significantly cheaper in terms of tax benefit for a company car compared to the equivalent petrol car.
Yeah, actually, I'd like to make a comment on this page here, specifically about the fuel section. So when I was actually going into the office, it was about a 30-mile round trip. And I used to have a VW Bora 1.9 diesel, and that would cost me somewhere in the region of £220 each month. On Octopus Go, with any of the electric cars I've had up until this point, it's worked out somewhere in the region of £30 a month.
Mm.
So that is a very significant saving compared with even what's written on this particular slide. My assumption is the figures on this slide are using public chargers only. Do you know if that's correct?
It was just a study published by Direct Line. I was kind of scrabbling to find a total cost of ownership slide to compare it, and that's their numbers, and they didn't really go into a lot of their methodology for this. But yeah, it's like the previous slide about the cost of charging and some of these other factors. I didn't particularly want to go for absolutely the best case for everything in these slides, because I don't want people to say, oh, it's great, I should convert to an electric car, and find they don't get 5 miles to the kilowatt hour in their car because they're driving enthusiastically, or that they don't have the ability to move onto an EV-friendly tariff, or they need to use their car too much to charge, purely on the cheap tariffs. There are a number of things that, if you drive your car carefully, and if you move on to an EV-friendly tariff, and if you're using it to its best of its ability, you're going to make some quite significant savings. But I don't feel necessarily everyone is going to have either that opportunity or that mindset. As another consideration, the petrol cars, because they so much of their energy is wasted in heat and sound and the combustion of byproducts, they're actually probably more efficient running those at around about 50 to 55 miles an hour, which is one of the reasons those the MPG stats are used on that basis. For an electric car, because if you're not running it, if you're not powering it, it's not actually using the electricity to run the engine and some of the other parts. The actual most efficient speed for electric car is probably close to 30 miles an hour or even less. A team of students in I think Belgium took a Tesla for like an over 600-mile drive on one charge, but I think at an average of 16 miles an hour, which they found was the most efficient. It's not very practical to drive in that way. But one thing to consider, again, this comes back to this climate consideration. If you drive a car at 70 miles an hour, whether it's a petrol car or an electric car, it's still less efficient than driving that same car at 50 miles an hour. So, I think it's something we need to think about. You don't always need to drive at the speed limit, but it's just consideration. A few comments about charging. We've mentioned some of this earlier. There are a number of different means of charging. So in the top left is a charge cable you would typically come with your car. This is a Tesla one, so it's got a 3-pin plug on there. I don't know, it's probably a 4 and 3-pin plug, and that will enable you to get some charge from any socket. The cable below is one you would typically get with a car, which you can plug into a public charger. So some public chargers don't have a cable connected to them, so you need to use your own. So I think the ones in Tesco's or some car parks will have chargers you can plug into, but you need your own cable. The one in the middle is a lamppost charger. They found that by converting some existing lampposts to use LEDs instead of the kind of heated elements they had before, they're able to free up enough electricity that's supplied to them to actually charge cars from them as well. And so charging stations like that, the actual ubitricity is probably the best known of those charging points. There are more ubitricity charging points than any other network in the UK. And there's you can request having those in your street by going to your local council. And I think it's an important thing to consider, where if you don't have off-street parking, you can't plug into your own house, then you need an alternative. Now, you could always charge at the rapid chargers, the service station kind of charging, but being able to do it overnight close to your house is certainly be an advantage. I think a lot of that will come. And go on.
Yeah, sorry, I was just going to respond to Philip's comment, which is in the bottom third down here. So press reports about public charging suggesting it's massively costly to charge the car. I would definitely disagree with this. If you take average efficiencies across all of the EVs which are currently available, and then look at the cost per kilowatt hour at public chargers, I believe that the break even is somewhere between 40 and 45p per kilowatt hour. If you assume that the average petrol or diesel car costs roughly 12 to 13p per mile, which I believe is fairly average, then the break even is between 40 and 45p per kilowatt hour. A high proportion of public chargers are significantly less than that.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, here's one I prepared earlier. So I've borrowed this from the Tesla group, and this is looking at all the networks across the country and their price to charge. Now, this is rather than doing price per kilowatt, they've done this in bands, say how much it would cost to add 40 kilowatt hours, 60 kilowatt hours, or 80 kilowatt hours. Now, unlike with petrol and diesel, there's not a huge variation across the country. There are, some petrol stations that are cheaper than others, but it's not a huge difference. But if you look at the difference between here, so the difference of using BP Pulse with a subscription, so you subscribe to their service, you're paying £8 a month, but a 60 kilowatt hour charge would cost you £9, whereas rocking up to an Ionity charger and just using a contactless charge, that would cost you £40. So the variation between the top and bottom is actually closer to 4 times, which is quite extraordinary. I think market dynamics will change that over time. You see along the bottom of the chart, there are some which are pay as you go, some you have to use an app, some you need to subscribe to, some you use a QR code on your phone, some contactless. It's not an ideal situation currently, and there's a government consultation on charging. I think EVA England are doing something similar, where they're looking at what people want. What do you want to do? Do you need to just pull up to a charger, plug in, and have it recognize your car and charge straight away to an account? Because some can do that. Do you want to use a contactless card? Do you want to have a subscription? There are many different ways of doing it, but it seems strange that you can have like almost a 4 times difference in cost to charge across the different networks, and I think that just wouldn't work with petrol stations. Although motorway service stations, fuel tends to be a bit more expensive, but it's not multiples. And if we look at actually how much that charges, so coming into the same slide we looked at earlier, comparing the Tesla and the BMW, if you go for the bottom end of that slide, so the left end of the slide, you can get down to, if you're on a subscription, you can get down to 20 pence per kilowatt hour, which gives you a cost per mile. If you're only ever using rapid chargers and you're on that network, it would still be cheaper for you to use than the cheapest petrol station in the country, using that to fill up your 3 Series. If you went for the average petrol price across the country and using a Tesla for the average rapid charger, it's still roughly equivalent, slightly cheaper for the Tesla. And if you only ever use the most expensive chargers in the country, it's about 1.5 times the most expensive petrol you can use. So it's not exactly Wild West, but I think this needs to change. I don't think people want to find that they've planned to stop at a charger and the only one that's on their route is one that's very, very expensive.
Yeah, so there's an interesting comment here from the Renault Zoe Owners Club, and it just says, I know someone that lives off BP Polar subscription, works out cheaper than standard home charging. Now, when my charger failed a couple of years ago, we ran both of our cars off our BP or Pulse, I think it's called now, subscription, while for the month or so that we had the charger out. As it happens, there's a charger in the local car park near where we were working in the office, and it was I think it was a £1 connection fee. So literally, you rock up, you plug your car in, you pay £1, and you charge your car for £1. And I'm there all day in the office anyway, so it was really easy. But actually, it's a CYC charger, which is another one, which is now owned by Polar. And for them, I think it was a £20 a year for the card. Sorry, for CYC, it was £20 a year for the card and £1 per charge. And for Polar, it was £7 a month, and charging was free. So yeah, for £7 a month, there's a guy who lives locally to me who lives in flats, and he works in the same area, and he drives his Leaf every day to that same car park, and 3 times a week he charges his car for his £7 flat subscription fee or whatever it is now, and that's how he runs his electric car, living in a flat. So
yeah, it certainly can be done, and a lot of people use these, and there are certainly a number of free charging options. So our local Tesco's has installed a number of chargers which are they're not rapid chargers, they're fast chargers, but you can plug in and charge for free while you're in the shop. You're not going to get a huge amount of extra miles, but it is free electricity, so why wouldn't you? But the comment here is really, if you're thinking about, okay, it's cheap to charge at home, but if I'm on a long journey, is it going to be very expensive? And it isn't really. It's no more expensive than a petrol car, and in many cases quite cheaper. I apologise for the next slide because I couldn't find one that gave me everything I wanted. But it's looking at how quickly a car will charge, and this is again, apologise, it's another Tesla one. But how quickly can you charge a car from empty to full? And this is using a 250 kilowatt fast charger with no other things, slowing it down. And the suggestion is you can get 280 miles of charge in half an hour, but it's important to note that sometimes it's easier, it's actually quicker to do a number of small stops than one large spot, because the batteries, there's a sweet spot for charging them when they're mostly empty, and then as they get, the fuller they get, the charge rate will come down, and the last few kilometers, or the last few miles of charge will take a long time. In fact, as maybe even slower than the rate you would get charging from home. So this band of maybe 20 to 60% of charge in your car is probably a good a good band to be in.
Yeah, generally a good rule of thumb that I've always heard is that 0 to 80% will take roughly about the same amount of time as 80 to 100%.
Yeah.
So if what you're after is time efficiency, only ever charge up to 80% on motorways at rapid chargers, just because otherwise you're going to be wasting your own time.
Absolutely. But I think all cars are different, chargers are different, and it's maybe a case of using some experience of you driving a car to fine tune what you might how you would use the car.
Sorry, there's a really interesting comment here from Nick, which says many chargers are cheaper if you if you have an account, because you only pay 5% VAT instead of 20%. So that is a big thing. If you're a member of a subscription service, or you're a member, they can charge you 5% VAT. But if you're just using contactless, or you're using pay as you go in some way, then it's 20% VAT. As far as I understand it, I'll talk to one of my colleagues at EVA and get the confirmation on that. But I'm pretty sure that's how it works. So it's well worth being aware. That's one of the reasons why joining these people and subscribing to them is the way to go.
That's interesting. No, I didn't know that.
I think there's talk about trying to change that for the operators to allow them to charge 5% VAT.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Okay, moving on. So if you're convinced about moving to an electric car, the next thing probably would be to do some research. So these are some of the resources that I've used. YouTube has a fantastic number of people who are documenting their journeys to electric cars. Fully Charged is a long-running show. They do a lot on electric cars. Another one I quite like is EVM. So this guy is one guy with his experience of electric cars, quite down to earth, a Yorkshireman, so he doesn't like spending money. So his experience is quite interesting. There are a number of good places on the web. So Next Green Car has a lot of information. Electrek is one that I tend to follow. There's like probably more US focused than I would like, but they cover just about everything that's happening. And then there are a few magazines you can get in the newsagents, so things like Charged and Drive Electric, though I'm slightly nervous in those because they sell advertising, and that sometimes with print journalism, it's biasing some of their results. So maybe not necessarily the way to go. Probably a better way, I would think, would be to see one before you buy. There are a number of different places to do that. As an admin for Sussex EVs, I'd be remiss by not mentioning that there are pretty nearly 500 members of our group currently, and just about every model of car that you can possibly buy. Don't know if we've got a take-home owner yet, but just about everything you could possibly want to buy. And COVID permitting, we will have regular meetings where we'll meet up in a location and anyone can come and talk to the owners about their cars. One thing you will find if you're thinking about the journey, if you talk to someone about their electric car, they will talk to you. I think a lot of people are very keen, and it might even be difficult to get away. A couple of years ago in Lewis, we ran an EV day in the Harvey's Brewery Yard in partnership with Avesco and Transition Town Lewis, and we'll be doing a similar kind of show this year, but it'll be a virtual one that will be in April. You can ask manufacturers to test drives. There's an EV experience centre in Milton Keynes, which probably you can't go to now, but that enables you to hire a car for maybe 1 or 2 days to get a feel for whether you like it. Fully Charged Live is a show that should run every year, didn't run last year, but I think it's been running in Farnborough in June this year. So
watch this space.
Okay. Well, the date isn't great, but we'll see how that changes.
The date I think will change. Well, yeah, the date I think will change because with the COVID stuff going on. As far as I'm aware, it will be running this year. We're just not sure on when. Okay. EVs in the Park is a very large, kind of more of an owner-based show, and that's in Coventry, and we're waiting for details on what's going to happen with that this year. And last year we had plans for a similar kind of event in Worthing, which COVID cancelled, but hopefully that will be back on soon. So yeah, there are a number of different places to do that. Certainly, COVID permitting, talking to existing owners rather than dealers, I think would be my preference. I spent a lot of time talking to people who owned their cars, and universally people were very proud and very happy that they'd moved to electric cars, and I think without exception they said they would never go back. So that gave me the confidence to move on.
It's also worth noting that compared with just a few years ago, there are now dozens of electric car clubs around the UK and Ireland, and a very high proportion of them do have local meetups with local people, and the people at these events, they will want to talk to you, like you say, they will want to talk to you about their experience, about their car, and there might even be cake.
Okay. That's a winning answer. A question here about whether to go for new cars versus used, and the question about how long the cars last. So probably the oldest lease in the UK must be about 10 years old now, and many of those are still going strong, partly down to the high second-hand price. So they even the older cars have quite a significant value. I think one of the questions that people will often ask about the batteries, whether the batteries will die, whether they won't last a long time. That doesn't seem to be the case. I think some of the very first generation cars, some of them were used very heavily and the batteries degraded a bit, but the more modern EVs don't tend to have that same decline. I think a number of the manufacturers also offered a battery lease option. So I think Renault and Nissan certainly offered that, so that you could get the car cheaper but lease the battery from them, and if there was a problem with the battery you could swap it out. So I think they're moving away from that. I think they've found that the batteries have quite a good lifetime, so they're not it's not such an issue.
I think it's definitely been shown that the batteries will outlast the car. The rest of the car will fall apart long before the battery.
Yeah. Technology lock-in is a question as things. So we've looked at the different rates of charge. Some of the newer cars will have an 800-volt battery pack, and they can charge faster. The batteries have more range. There's new technology. There's more advanced driving features coming in. And if you buy a car, you are locking yourself into technology that's going to get out of date. And I suppose that's the case with anything you buy. You get buyer's remorse if they come up with something new just after you bought it. And it's really just a case of thinking about, does the car you're buying do what you need it to do? Does it do what you need it to do? And then if that's the case, then it makes sense. But as I think we said before, charging rates improve, range improves, efficiency improves. So newer cars will be slightly better than older cars, and you'd expect that to always be the case. But it's a consideration.
The thing to note is that unlike ICE cars, which are kind of at the end of the development cycle, the increments for those cars is quite small. So year on year, you don't see a big difference between this year's Audi whatever and next year's Audi whatever and last year's Audi whatever. The cars in the last 3 or 4 years, they don't change hugely. They change the wheels, they change a few bits and pieces here. The updates are minor. With electric cars, the technology is moving so quickly that I've got a first edition E-Nero, and it's an amazing car. It's just a fantastic car. And it's 2 years old now. Yeah, 2 and a bit years old now. There's been 2 or 3 iterations of that car since, and the new one is amazing. And do I have buyer's remorse? No. Do I have envy? Definitely. The new one is lovely. It has just features that were missing on my car because they just weren't available at the time. Am I anticipating the new EVs coming out, like the new Hyundai 5 and the new one from Kia? Yeah, because they're going to be amazing cars. And the jump will be big just because technology is moving so quickly still.
It's also worth noting that there are some garages, and I'm specifically thinking of people like Indra, people like Cleveley EV, are now providing a service to upgrade the battery components on older electric cars, specifically Leafs at the moment, but I'm sure that will start coming out for other brands as well. So you can get an old Gen 1 Leaf with a 24 kilowatt hour battery, and for a certain amount of money, somewhere in the region between 4,000 and 6,000, I believe, you can upgrade that battery to something significantly bigger. And that car, mechanically, is probably absolutely fine. You just wanted a bit more range. And now you can do it for a lot less money than buying a brand new one.
Yeah. Actually, with comparison with buying a brand new one, maybe some of the nearly new cars are maybe better value for money, but then whether you want a new car or not, that's really your choice. I think, as we discussed earlier, depreciation is always a concern if you buy a car, and if you're looking to resell it. So I'm more of a buy a car and then run it forever, and then get a replacement car when it's kind of near end of life. But depreciation, the feeling is at the moment that that's going to be less for an electric car than it would be for a comparable petrol car.
And I think one of the reasons for that is the battery pack still has considerable value, even if the car is a number of years old.
Yeah. Right. So coming towards the end now, some questions that follow on for that, whether you should lease, purchase or finance. And it really depends on your personal preference. If you always like to have the newest things and want to hand back the car and get a new car, then leasing is certainly a good option. If you're leasing, the one way that can work for you is if you're using the car heavily, then your reduction in running costs from having cheaper charging can actually almost totally offset your lease costs on the car. So yeah, if you're a heavy user of the car, it actually might be very cost effective to lease a new one with good range and high efficiency is certainly an option. Some leasing operators include charging now. So GridServe are a charging operator. They built their first very large electric forecourt in Braintree and Essex, which had, I think, 32 rapid charging spots in it. And they plan to operate another 100 of those. They got planning approval for one in Uckfield in Sussex last week, and they will lease you cars which include charging from their electric forecourt. So if you happen to be reasonably close or have one on your travels nearby, then leasing a car which included free electric rapid charging on the journey is an option. And as we said before, some short-term leasing is available, so you can try cars for a few days, maybe a month, if you want to see if it's right for you, and then to try before you buy. So that's the end of this session. Got a few future sessions coming up, one of which will be a panel discussion with owners of some of the more popular models. So very much like the electric meetup, electric version of the meetup we've talked about before, where you can talk to or ask questions of the owners of some of the more well-known and popular models. A session on tips and tricks and things for using your EV, so how you plan journeys, how you can charge efficiently, how you can drive efficiently, a number of things like that. The Lewis Electric Car Show that was held a couple of years ago, there will be a virtual version of that in the middle of April this year. So if you want to search online with Transition Town Lewis, that information will be available. And then a future session probably going on for that will be what the future holds. So what's going to happen in the next few years is really the question. So that's where we are. Thank you all for watching and listening. That's me done.
Right. Thank you all, and see you soon.
Thanks.